For more than 50 years, ReSurge International has delivered life-changing care. We increase access to reconstructive surgery, and we instill hope for a brighter future. We assist thousands of patients each year in 19 low-income countries in Africa, Latin America, and Asia. And all of the support that ReSurge provides is free of charge to the patients as well as to the trainees with whom we work. Our work includes mentoring and training local early career reconstructive surgical teams, and you will hear about one of those in just a moment. We also fund local surgeons who have been trained and qualified by ReSurge, and once they are trained and qualified, we underwrite the reconstructive surgical care they provide to patients who would otherwise have no recourse. And then finally, we deliver direct care through on-the-ground surgical interventions staffed by U.S. and international volunteers, practitioners with significant experience, and hearts to match. So today, this morning, you're going to hear about one of our programs. I would like to introduce and have you meet Dr. Yung Nguyen, who has volunteered as a ReSurge mentor in this program. And Dr. Nguyen is also the Director of Breast Reconstruction at the Stanford Women's Cancer Center and the Director of Adult Plastics Clinic at Stanford University. Dr. Nguyen, welcome.
Thank you, Jeff. Good morning. It's such an honor for me to be here and to be part of the Pioneer Women in Reconstructive Surgery program. This initiative is very near and dear to my heart. I'm a plastic and reconstructive microsurgeon. When Dr. James Chang recruited me to Stanford 9 years ago, I was so excited to know that there would be an organization like ReSurge here that I could get involved in. My first mission trip was in 2014, and I've been hooked since then. ReSurge gives surgeons like myself an opportunity to give back to the community. Coming back to my native country in Vietnam as a woman surgeon to teach local physicians, to treat patients in need, and to serve as a role model for other young female surgeons have been an inspiring experience, both humbling and inspiring at the same time. I have witnessed the effectiveness of ReSurge Global Training Model in empowering surgeons in underserved countries through training, leadership development, and mentoring network that enabled them to advance their careers and to equip them with the additional skills and tools to help their patients. It's amazing for me to see them become more comfortable, confident, and competent with the surgeries at each returning trip. As a mentor, there's nothing more rewarding than to see your mentee becomes a mentor themselves. During my trips, I had the opportunity to train Dr. Hao and his team of surgeons in Hue in breast reconstruction. And what a joy it was for me to see him subsequently doing the same procedures for other patients while leading his junior colleagues through the surgeries. Today, there are 5 billion people worldwide who still lack access to surgical care. And there are only 3 female surgeons for every 1 million people in low-income countries. As a single surgeon, I can help 10 to 14 patients per trip. But by training 20 surgeons during the same trip, we can help hundreds and thousands of patients in the long run. It's a fantastic self-sustaining training model. So on behalf of my colleagues near and far, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to all our supporters here today. Your generous donation fueled the ReSurge engine and allow us to do what we love. Thank you so much. And now the ReSurge team has a special treat. They have a premiere short video this morning to introduce you to the Pioneer Women in Reconstructive Surgery program. Thank you.
Essential surgical care is critical. Yet for every 1 million people in low-income countries, there are only 3 women surgeons.
I think what inspires my work as a surgeon is the need that I see. We have a single plastic reconstructive and burn surgeon in the country. There is need for me to do my best in my work.
The challenges that I tend to face are an issue of training. When there are not a lot of plastic surgeons are not around in my country, It's a country of about 17 million people, and there are only 3 people who are catering for this.
We're here to change that. The Pioneering Women in Reconstructive Surgery program is a joint initiative between ReSurge International and SkinCeuticals to advance the first generation of women reconstructive surgeons in underserved parts of the world. Together, we support these incredible women through surgical training, leadership development, and mentorship.
You're kind of just thrown into the deep end to become a leader, but nobody really gives you the tools for it. And I feel like we're getting the tools now.
This initiative is going to help a lot of females, boosting their confidence and keeping the hope alive.
I love to see the results. Like, it's almost immediate. You work on a patient and their life is affected almost immediately. It's very humbling.
Now we are training more women surgeons, so that's one more person that will be able to help these people, and that is quite amazing.
At ReSurge International, our mission is to help the 5 billion people around the world who lack access to surgical care. And by empowering incredible women like these, we are transforming lives, one woman at a time.
Good morning. I'm Christina Dickerson.
Leslie Harris, SkinCeuticals.
And Leslie and I are so thrilled to be a part of the ReSurge inaugural Thought Leader Breakfast. We can't thank you enough for being here and supporting and sharing our passion for this incredible organization. We are beyond lucky today to have Julie Hanna and John Markoff as our esteemed guests, with a special thanks to board member Matthew Nathans for introducing us. Julie and John's conversation today will explore the empowerment model in the Valley and abroad and demonstrate how technology has made this model both replicable and sustainable. It's pioneering and entrepreneurial, and exactly what we do at ReSurge. Since we're on the clock, and you most certainly would prefer to hear from Julie and John, I'll turn it to Leslie to introduce our accomplished and inspiring guests.
So since we're on the clock, if I had to really give them the full introduction they deserve, we would be here for a very long time past 9 o'clock. So I'm going to give you the highlights and then let them speak for themselves. Julie Hanna is a Coptic Egyptian and war refugee. She's been founder, CEO, or founding executive of 5 Silicon Valley venture-backed companies. She's an accomplished technologist, entrepreneur, and investor. In 2015, she was appointed the Presidential Ambassador for Global Entrepreneurship by then President Obama. And today, she is the Executive Chair of Kiva and a Senior Advisor to Google X. John Markoff is an affiliate professor at the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence. He, too, is an award winner, a 2013 Pulitzer Prize in explanatory reporting as part of a New York Times project, as well as a Nathaniel Nash Award recipient and fellow of the Society of Professional Journalists. So without further ado, I would like to turn it over to them to join us for a wonderful and very inspiring conversation. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear us? Can you hear me?
Good morning.
Great. It's great to be outside of the Zoom frame. This is the first time I've done something like this in 2 years. Actually, it's a little weird, but I hope we can stay outside. So we're going to talk about the empowerment model, but I wanted to go backwards in Silicon Valley history for just a few minutes. I left the New York Times in 2017, and I've spent the last 5 years working on a biography of a man by the name of Stuart Brand, who was a Stanford graduate. And he was right here in that period of time before Silicon Valley became Silicon Valley. And I think it's very relevant to the discussion of empowerment. I mean, this idea actually may go back to Lao Tzu, from what I read. I guess that's controversial, but the whole notion of teaching someone to fish and its value is sort of what we're going to explore. But I wanted to make the case just briefly before we started that that idea had a big impact on our culture because of Silicon Valley as early as the 1960s. And it's kind of a convoluted story, but I'll tell it quickly. And that is that Silicon Valley was named in 1971 by Don Hoffler. It was about a bunch of guys who were largely down, mostly guys, in Santa Clara. And they hung out at places like the Bold Knight and the Wagon Wheel. And the valley was always multicultural, though. And at the same time, in the 60s, up here, right around where we're sitting right now, there were 2 laboratories that opened in 1962. One was right over behind Stanford on Arastadero Road. It was started by a guy by the name of John McCarthy, who's the guy who coined the term artificial intelligence. And he thought at that time that it would take a decade and $10 million to create a thinking machine. Actually, the term artificial intelligence he had coined in 1956. And he coined it because he didn't want to argue with another gentleman by the name of Norbert Wiener, who previously had come up with the name cybernetics. And so he thought Wiener was bombastic and a bit of a bore, and so he came up with a different phrase, AI, in the summer of 1956. So this is 1962. He starts the Stanford Artificial Intelligence Laboratory. The same year, on the other side of campus at SRI, another computer scientist, a man by the name of Doug Engelbart, created another laboratory called the Augmentation Research Center. And he coined a different term. His term was intelligence augmentation, IA/AI, on both sides of campus. And they were a big part of what would become Silicon Valley just 5-6 years later. So in 1966, this Stanford graduate, whose name was Stuart Brand, plopped himself down right in the middle of this area, 66, 67, 68, and created something called the Whole Earth Catalog. And so now come back to why I'm telling you this story. The subtitle to this book, which became sort of the tome of my generation, was Access to Tools. And Brand came up with that idea that giving someone a tool is the most effective way to change the world because of 2 people, his interaction with 2 people. One of them was Buckminster Fuller. Buckminster Fuller gave a series of lectures in San Jose in 1966, which Brand attended. And Fuller really believed that if you taught someone to use a tool, that was the most effective way to change the world. The other person who influenced Brand, which is not as well known, Brand became very close to Doug Engelbart in 67 and 68. And Engelbart's lab was pioneering the technology which we now use as the internet and personal computers. Steve Jobs, of course, said it best, the personal computer is a bicycle for the mind. Engelbart was doing that in 1966, 67. And so Brand really soaked that up. He was a bit of a libertarian, but not in the Ayn Rand sense of the word. He was he talked about the impact of this technology would be to create a realm of personal power. And that was the impact of what the Whole Earth Catalog became for my generation. It was this kind of serendipity and fantasy amplifier. You found something in that book, and your life went in a different direction. And I think there's and so I wanted to make the point that Silicon Valley had this very early impact on the American culture, but while it was still becoming Silicon Valley, and in exactly the way we're going to describe today. I mean, I can't tell you the number of people I ran into while I was researching this project who saw something in the Whole Earth Catalog and their life went in a new direction, completely new direction. One example, James McNiven, the gentleman who started Bucks, was selling milking equipment to farmers in Connecticut. And one stormy day, he decided he was going to come out here and live off the land. And he, in the sort of fake it to make it tradition, he turned himself into a contractor. And one of the first gigs he got was remodeling Steve Jobs' house in Los Altos, which did not end well. But So, the empowerment idea was here in Silicon Valley very early, and I think Julie knows a lot more about the empowerment model today as it's sort of being developed by the Valley. James came here from selling milking equipment. What brought you to Silicon Valley?
Not nearly as interesting as that, but maybe. I think, it's funny, I didn't really know what brought me to Silicon Valley until I was having a moment of existential angst. About 20 years ago, I sort of then, you heard a little bit about my professional background, sort of had a rapid succession of companies that I'd built and just exited one of them, and I was really thinking about how did I get here, and how can I deepen my sense of purpose with the work that I do with technology? And I had that moment that I call it my Steve Jobs moment. Steve Jobs infamously in his commencement speech at Stanford, I said, you can only connect the dots on your life in hindsight. And so I had this moment of realizing, okay, I ended up on the front lines of the tech revolution, literally on the eve of the internet, and my journey began on the front lines of war. And what is that implausible journey that brought me here? And I would say that my earliest beginnings personally very much shaped my entire relationship to technology and all the products and companies that I've built and I work with today. And it was really born out of, some of you may remember the Black September War. It was a regional war, the first regional war in the Middle East between Israel, the PLO, and Jordan. And we were living in a small town called Irbid that bordered Israel, and it had become the front line of the war. And we came home one day and discovered rebel soldiers, the Black September rebel soldiers had taken post on the roof of our home, and with that came this kind of dawning, revelation that they were using us as their human shields. And so we lived like that for 2 years, being fired on and bombed daily, and as you can imagine, it was a brutal and bloody war, much like the war in Syria today, that the level of disfigurement that I saw as a child was quite severe. And so I just wanted to say that when I learned about ReSurge from Matthew and then meeting Christina, I was very deeply moved and touched by the work. It's very personal to me because of what I witnessed. And so it was interesting to sort of revisit that part of my history. My last memory of Black September was fleeing my one-room schoolhouse as army tanks began firing directly on us. And I fled with my family. We eventually made our way to Beirut and then immigrated to the US. And I never saw my classmates again. And we were one of the lucky ones. And I often think about my classmates and I wonder what happened to them. And it's one of the things that really sort of has made me realize that one thing that shapes everything in our lives really comes down to the kind of access that we get. And when we got access to the United States, we felt like we'd won the lottery. We came here with a great hope of building a new life in a new land. And then I quickly saw that hope turn to struggle. My parents were educated and resourceful. They couldn't find work. We didn't have a place to live. And they just couldn't get access. And I saw the way that people, very nice people who were helping us when we were struggling, the way that they would look at my family. And it was a look I'd never seen before. And I'd see an expression on my parents' face I'd never seen before. And it took me, is actually when I was thinking about this in my angst, that I connected the dots and I realized, that look I was seeing, that was a look of pity. And that expression on my parents' face, I was watching their dignity being chipped away. And this sense of disempowerment. And I saw how that it really became defining for my family. And it diminished their dreams and their sense of hope. And I came to realize that so often we look at people through the lens of their broken circumstances, and we think that they're broken too. And again, I think that this can be so disempowering, and it's very, again, why I really draw such great inspiration from ReSurge's work, because this sense of being looked at because of being disfigured and being viewed as broken, when in fact it's your circumstances that are broken. So, seeing my parents' dreams diminished fueled my own dreams, and I dreamt of a world that understood that pity is the near enemy of compassion, that pity says poor you, and compassion says I could be you. And I also dreamt of a world that understands that talent is universal, but opportunity isn't. And most of all, I dreamt of a world that understands that a cornerstone of justice is fair access. And the reason I'm sharing this is because when I went to college, I was 16, I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I stumbled into computer science. And it was in the early days of networking, and I saw something just inherently empowering about networking technology. And I was one of the first people to begin building messaging systems. And messaging systems, they're old school today, but really broke down systems of hierarchy and empowered people, because information and communication were power. Those that had it held the power, and everybody else didn't. It was a power over model. And what I saw with networking and then with the dawn of the internet was it was inherently empowering because it shifted the balance of power to the many, not just the few. And the light bulb went on for me at that point, and I thought, this can give a little bit of power, put it in the hands of people who don't have it, people like my family. And I've come to believe that technology is inherently the most democratizing force in the history of humankind if we aim it toward that end, because of that empowerment as a tool. So that's what brought me to Silicon Valley. I came with those dreams and a computer science degree and was just, wanted to create a different future.
Connect a couple more dots. You said you stumbled into computer science. How did that happen?
This is an embarrassing story. I was really good in math. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And my mother, who I never listened to, said, I hear computer science is going to be a really promising field. And it was the first and only time I've ever listened to my mother. I probably should listen to her more. But.
And the empowerment model as an organizational structural thing is associated with feminism. You grew up a bit after, my sense is, the 60s and 70s feminist movement. Was it an influence on you?
The movement wasn't, but I never met an injustice I didn't fall in love with because of the way I had grown up. And I was very much a flaming feminist. I picketed I lived in the small town in Alabama during my formative years, and I picketed the town hall to play Little League baseball because of the idea that a girl couldn't, do what boys could do seemed like the greatest injustice in the world at the time. And so I ended up sort of breaking the gender barrier in sports and protesting any gender inequity that I could. But I think the idea of empowerment, now we're talking about it because, when you have a dominant group, doesn't have to think about empowerment because they have the power. And we have a fraught relationship with power because we tended to think about power as a power over. How do I sequester power? And empowerment is about innate power. And so it's usually, we think about empowerment when we're thinking about an underserved group, a minority group, whether it's women, some groups that are low on the socioeconomic ladder, ethnic, racial minorities. And it's a sort of thing like, because when they've been separated from power, they've been separated from their own sense of innate power often. And so I think it's a wonderful conversation we're having for everyone, including the dominant group, because this idea of in a more enlightened form of power that's not a power over, but an igniting the power from within and a power sharing to empower others, I think is a really important step in our social evolution.
Yeah. Well, what did you think when you came to the Valley? The Valley was already sort of up and running. You were second or third generation, is that right?
Yeah, I came in the early 90s. I thought I had always felt like a fish out of water and a misfit, and I thought I found the island of the misfits, and you can do anything you want. I was such a rule breaker, not without purpose, but because I felt like a lot of times rules didn't make sense because I wanted to create. And it was just being in this petri dish of you make the rules, you dream about a future you want to create, and then you go do it. And I could see that one dream could transform a million, even a billion realities. And so it was so energizing, igniting to me, and it made me think a lot about what are the cultural elements here that ignite that part of us, and how do you democratize that to other parts of the world? That's a lot of what sort of has driven me. That what's that secret sauce that we sort of have here that we can kind of infect the rest of the world with?
Yeah, you talked about the democratizing potential of this technology, and like you, I began as an internet utopian, but there are these contradictions. One of the things that I think many of us who are involved in the early rise of the internet was that it was going to spread democratic values to the world. Well, it turns out it was a two-way street. As the 2016 election and 2020 election have shown us, it turns out it was also the most effective Trojan horse in history. This is also true about wealth. It's had this huge impact to spread wealth to the world, but it also has accumulated wealth. And I wanted to ask this in the context of you have two hats. You have a nonprofit hat and you have a for-profit hat. And how do you deal with those contradictions?
Yeah, I think that's why I said it has a potential to be the most democratizing force in the history of humankind if we direct it towards that end. And I think that ultimately technology is an amplifier and an accelerator. And so it amplifies and accelerates the high side of our humanity and the low side of our humanity and everything in between. And the democratization the democratization is sort of the spreading of access. What human beings do with that access becomes sort of our own discovery of again, how do people seek to sequester power versus share it. So whether it's working in the for-profit context or the nonprofit context, my sort of the red thread that's run through everything I do is really about purpose-driven businesses. That you're in service to something much higher than you, that you're thinking about what value am I creating in the world, not just what value am I capturing in my profit. And to me, those are the most enduring companies in the world, that when you're really guided by a higher sort of sense of purpose, whether you're for-profit or nonprofit. And those that focus on the value capture disproportionately, that's where you get the inequities that we're seeing exacerbated by a COVID world, right? If that equation gets upside down, if we're only thinking about value capture and power capture. So I think we're having this moment of reckoning with ourselves about, you do that to its logical conclusion, and you end up with the kinds of inequities, economic and otherwise, that we're dealing with today. So, it's a deeply philosophical question, but it's also a structural question. So I spend a lot of time trying to ignite that in business leaders that I work with, and also looking at what are structural ways and ways of governance. I'm a partner at a venture firm called Obvious Ventures, and we invest in purpose-driven technology companies. So one of the things we do when we give them the term sheet, we actually have them write their mission statement in the term sheet as an explicit commitment. And so those are, ways of governing ourselves toward that.
There are structural ways for doing this. There's this notion of a B Corp. Does that come onto your radar with your for-profit? Patagonia, Ben & Jerry's are examples of B Corp successful.
Yeah, there are some structural efforts like B Corp and triple bottom line, which are companies essentially saying, especially in a world of sort of activist investors, which are kind of pulling things in one direction, is we have a governance structure that obligates us to also be accountable to our mission. And in addition to profitability and shareholders, you have the shift around stakeholder accountability versus just pure shareholder accountability. So there are some structural shifts happening. That's why watershed moments like when the CEO of BlackRock, Larry Fink, has written his annual CEO letter, they're the largest investor in the world, kind of saying to companies, we're going to measure you on your social impact, on your environmental impact, on your stakeholder impact, on your long-term strategy. Those things hopefully are kind of starting to shift away from this short-term quarterly capitalism.
So there is this...
Probably more than you wanted to know about that.
No. Actually, I want to ask more, because there still is this perspective, and I think it's held by some in the Valley, that was initially articulated by Milton Friedman, that there is one responsibility of the executive of the company, and that is to make more money for their shareholders.
We're finding out what happens when you do that, and I think it's an overinterpretation. It was important at the time because companies were not as optimized in the way they manage their expenses, and now we've interpreted and oversaw for that, and we're sort of looking at how we rebalance. That's why, that's why I work with Kiva. Kiva is a really powerful model that scaled globally through technology that's about purpose and sustainability and profit. So I think more and more, and we have a generation now with millennials and the Gen Z. I mean, they've inherited the largest amount of money to invest, over $1 trillion in wealth. They surpassed the baby boomers. And they insist on having a purpose-driven relationship with the companies they work for, invest in, and buy from. So that's also sort of creating this demand.
Is it true that most of Kiva's borrowers are women? And is that intentional, or
Yes.
is that a demand side or a supply side question?
Yeah.
How is that?
Well, for those who aren't familiar with Kiva, Kiva, I sometimes say sort of, if the internet and microfinance had a love child, it would be called Kiva. Thank you. I'm terrible at delivering jokes, so I appreciate the laugh. We married the principles of microfinance with the internet and invented the crowdfunding model, essentially, back in 2005, and peer-to-peer lending. And it was all towards crowdsourcing loans for micro-entrepreneurs that are underserved, unbanked, living in the remotest parts of the world. And we also lend to entrepreneurs here in the US now. And so that model wouldn't be possible without technology. And so, sorry, I was so busy taking in the laughing, I forgot your question.
It's about womenism.
Women, yes. So microfinance, the roots of microfinance, really what Muhammad Yunus demonstrated is that women are very good at repaying their loans to the tune of 98%. And if you look at women, they reinvest 90% of their income in their families and in others. And so they not only uplift their lives, they uplift the lives of their families, of their communities, and ultimately plant the seeds that can regenerate sort of a region or even change the fate of a nation. And most acutely, where you can see back to empowerment, after one of my talks, who's the author of Drawdown? Paul Hawken. Came to me and he said, the work that Kiva is doing is actually, we found, if you're not familiar with Drawdown, it was looked at the top 100 ways that we can reverse climate change. And they quantified it. And he said, the number one way we found out that we can reverse climate change is by empowering women and girls. And so the work that Kiva is doing, and I'd say ReSurge is doing, figures prominently in that, because what they found is that they did the math that when women are empowered, they educate their girls, they have fewer children, they make smarter choices that affect the environment, and it's estimated that by 2050, the population can be reduced by 1 billion and 50 gigatons in CO2 emissions. So all of a sudden, kind of see this idea that we think of poverty and climate as siloed, but they're actually inextricably linked, and it all has to do with empowerment of women. So with Kiva, we fund 80 to 85% of women, and we see the same thing sort of playing out as well. And it's the one place where there's a bias to funding women over men. People really like to fund the women there, so it's a nice leveling of the playing field.
I'm a minor Kiva investor. I think a mutual friend of ours made me a Kiva investor, and I just went and looked before our talk, because I haven't been an active Kiva investor, but the only defaulted loan was from someone in Afghanistan, which made me very sad, actually.
Yeah.
I don't know the history. But
yeah, usually it's because difficult, right now, even with COVID, with the devastation, which disproportionately affects our borrowers, we're kind of coming up on $2 billion loaned to 4+ million entrepreneurs. The money's come from 190 countries. The entrepreneurs are in 84 countries. And even with COVID, which has been devastating, the repayment rate is held at 96%. So they're very highly credit worthy. And most of them live on $1 to $2 a day, maybe $10 a day.
This marriage with the internet, are there other examples besides Kiva that come, and do you have allied organizations that you can point to? I mean, how how broadly can you take the idea of scaling? I guess that's the attribute of the internet that underlies Kiva's model, at least from a technological point of view.
Yeah, I mean, so scaling a couple ways. On crowdfunding, I mean, the idea of the crowdfunding seemed insane when we started. People thought the idea that strangers would come together and pool small amounts of money to send to strangers and people would actually pay it, that just seemed insane. But actually it's given way to, you know, two major industries, crowdfunding and peer-to-peer lending, and that's unlocked hundreds of billions of dollars. There's thousands of crowdfunding companies and marketplaces, and it's changed. It's been the biggest, I'd say, arguably innovation in finance is, you know, peer-to-peer lending. So that's kind of one way it's scaled as industries. Kiva's scale, we look at it, and there's nearly 2 billion people unbanked. And so we keep looking and saying, well, we're really proud of the several million we wouldn't have reached without technology, but we want to reach, how do we eradicate financial exclusion in its entirety? And I believe we can do that with technology because, you know, if Facebook can reach 2 billion people, why can't we reach 2 billion people through technology and loans? And so we're doing some very interesting things with blockchain to put people's identities and credit histories on the blockchain that would really sort of allow us to scale at a whole different level.
This is separate from a currency.
Yeah, not crypto, blockchain.
Blockchain,
yeah.
Understood. But you haven't created a currency.
We have not.
Have you explored
We have the potential for that because we have this global marketplace, but we have not ventured there yet, waiting a little bit for the dust to clear on the area.
So back to the idea, this question of contradictions. One of the things that the Valley likes to say is, you know, it's about changing the world. And changing the world can mean anything, right? I mean, it seems to be one of the classic hollow, feel-good statements. What should changing the world mean?
Well, when I came here, you know, long before it became kind of a cynical, eye-rolling thing that satirized in the show Silicon Valley, it was a sincere intention, and I really, you know, it resonated with me because of all the things I talked about. I think change the world, you know, in the kingdom of Julie would be, you know, how do you change the world for the greater good and for the many, not just the few, and really being sort of deep and clear and sincere about that intention. Because I think when we do think about what does the greater good mean, what does doing things that uplift the many, not just the few? It's not an easy, simple answer, but it certainly evokes kind of a much larger sort of frame of thinking. I think one of the things I've seen in the Valley that's happened since the internet era and the dot-com boom is it attracted lots of different. We were a bunch of geeks and makers before the internet, and it sort of, you know, when part of the democratization is anybody could build a tech company, and so it attracted lots of people from all over the world with lots of different motivations, and some of those motivations were I can make a lot of money really fast, and so, you know, the ethos started to change a little bit as the Valley scaled and attracted kind of, you know, scale is always a challenge. So, you know, part of that is how do we reclaim that intention. And then also the other is how can we be wiser about the unintended consequences, because we're running the world's largest human experiments right now. That's the thing, when you have technology, you can scale it. It's like we're learning what social media does, you know, to, I don't know, half the world, a few billion people. And so that deeper study of responsible innovation and unintended consequences is something I think we're slow to get to, but we're being forced to go there in some ways.
Let's bring in the audience at this point. I'm mindful of people's times, and I'd like to solicit audience things that they'd like to ask Julie.
I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the democratization of education. You know, we have Khan Academy and Coursera and Udacity and so many others. And in the COVID era in particular, investment has really accelerated in this category. And you know, obviously that fits into the discussion in lots of interesting ways in terms of empowerment. I wondered if you could give us a sense of where that stands at this point in time, especially from the Valley's perspective.
Yeah, and to be fair, I am not an expert in that area, but I have studied it a bit, and I've spent some time with Saul Khan, who I think has been an incredible pioneer in the space. And so I think there's two ways to think about education. There's the informal, organic form of education, and there's the structured, formal education. And I think the organic, informal has really just been transformative. Anybody with one of these or a computer and that sense of empowerment and agency can, and we see this with the younger generation, they know far more than we did at their age, because that's sort of, information by osmosis and just in time kind of education in a way. The structural formal education side of the equation, I think, has really struggled to make inroads using technology, to my eye. This is sort of my view. I think that's largely because there are cultural and societal structural issues that end up coming up pretty quickly. And I have a longtime colleague who runs a venture fund that is exclusively focused on education. And she said, the deeper we sort of looked at this, to really, how do you affect system change, we found ourselves getting into social and cultural issues. And that if we didn't address those first, no amount of technology in terms of education was going to really sort of help people. So it gets into analog issues, essentially, and issues of inequity and inequality and motivation. And if this impulse of those with the resources saying, well, everyone wants the best education for their children. Those of us with great resources know how to execute on that far better than those that don't. So then how do you democratize something for the many, not just the few? And there are some inherent sort of, I'd say, again, societal and cultural and even psycho-spiritual factors that come into play. Probably an unsatisfactory answer, I'm sorry.
No. Here's a question.
Hi, Julie. Umesh Padwal. Fascinating journey. Delighted to hear that. I came from India to the US, and we have basic things in certain parts of the world that people don't have access to: electricity, internet, power, water. How do we get corporations and individuals and startups starting to put energy into those areas which are vastly underserved? About 4 billion people do not have the basic things which we take for granted here.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And some of the work that I do with Google X is around this, is how do you extend sort of the base infrastructure to the dark parts of the world, the most underserved parts of the world. And there's a couple of opportunities where I see kind of things succeeding is when you have folks from the region, or either they're there locally or who have gone to get experience in places like Silicon Valley, and then they go back, that motivation and then the understanding of the on-the-ground environment are really kind of essential ingredients to bridge to what's possible and manifest it. Because the ground realities can be so different, right? India, Africa, and so you need that ground understanding, whether it's cultural, whether it's structural, whether it's business relationships, et cetera, et cetera. The other is that there are opportunities for leapfrog. So one of the things that really made me think about how we could reach billions of people through Kiva was I met this borrower in Maragua, Kenya, and it took hours down a dirt road to reach him. He was a 72-year-old school teacher who had retired and become an entrepreneur. And his name was Erastus Kamani, and he explained to me through a translator that even though he only, and his name of his company was Rexel Industries. It was like this multinational sort of, it was just wonderful. And it was a ceramic stove liner business, and he would sell, this was a settlement that, not even a village, it was very remote. And cooking over open fire the ceramic stove liners make that much healthier. And he had named Rexel for his 6 daughters. It was an acronym because he had dreams of sending them to college, not just to school. And he explained to me that even though he only spoke Swahili, he pulled out a phone that was like a first-generation flip-top phone. He had learned how to apply for his loan, get his money, and repay his loan twice, $1,700. He tripled the size of his business. And I looked at that phone and I thought, if we can reach Erastus in Maragua, Kenya, there's nobody on the planet we can't reach. Now that's a leapfrog, right? You can't do that here in the US. Solar is a leapfrog, right, for electricity. We're doing some really interesting things around internet communication that are a leapfrog at X over sort of wireline infrastructure. So the leapfrog and the local knowledge are 2 ways that.
We have one more question.
My name is Nina Shelson, and I think I'm a little bit like you, although I say that very humbly because I'm so impressed. But I'm a biotechnologist and a venture capitalist. And I wanted to follow up a little bit on this question, which I think is maybe more the moral obligation piece of it. I'm also the step-parent of a 20-year-old sort of Gen X millennial. And I find while the search for meaning and purpose is there, the sense of commitment to philanthropy and investment is not there in that generation or even in mine to the degree that it ought to be. And I feel with the abundance and the wealth creation that has happened here in Silicon Valley and also in our counterpart in Boston and in New York, we should be able to do so much more. And how do we raise that commitment? How do we raise more money for charitable philanthropic works, whether they're double bottom line or pure philanthropy, because we have so much and we really give so little?
Yeah, that's a beautiful and important question. I found myself shifting to thinking about from moral obligation to moral inspiration, because in a way obligation makes us feel bad, like we're not doing enough, and we tend to sort of, we might do something out of guilt, but it doesn't stick, and we tend to want to run away from that feeling. But inspiration really ignites us, and it's a very positive and generous place to come from. I think I've thought a lot about how is it the place in this corner of the world has created more wealth, I think, than any in the history of humankind, is one of the least philanthropic places in the world. What's going on there? And I don't think it's because people don't care. I think that it's because this sense of, sometimes I say the entrepreneurs, we have an overdeveloped sense of empowerment and this change the world ethos of like, hey, we are changing the world with the companies that we built. That's our contribution to society. And that is an incomplete answer. So I think part of it is as we start to realize that is an incomplete answer, that fundamentally philanthropy, nonprofits exist because you have market failures. And it's important that as we capture a disproportionate amount of value, if we're inspired, we can start to see that, oh, actually, there's some meaningful value creation we can provide by also contributing to organizations that are addressing market failures. And the more it comes into our backyards, the more that we're motivated to do it. And so that's partly why I think the way we live becomes really important. How much cross-pollination do we have? In our world, whether it's that we travel to a part of the world that exposes us, or we travel a couple of miles down the road and see what's happening next door that we might otherwise forget about because we're zipping back and forth, to nice places like this. So I think that's a really important question. Thank you for asking it.
Thank you, Julie. Join me in thanking Julie for
Thank you, Julie and John. You are both so enrapturing to listen to. I'm sure I speak for the entire room in saying we could sit here and listen to you all day. So one more round of applause for an incredible... Thank you. And now we are so very excited to be able to introduce you to two of the stars of the video you saw earlier. Overcoming long travel and COVID protocol obstacles, these incredible powers women and surgeons are living proof that the empowerment model we just heard about from Julie and John is alive and well, and it works. Leslie.
Dr. Tinga Nyoni, who is the third reconstructive surgeon in Zimbabwe, a country of 15 million people. And also Dr. Matala Semonga, who is a trainee on track to be the second reconstructive surgeon in her country of Zambia and the first female. So after listening to all of this, I think you also can speak to your own experiences of the empowerment model, both as empowered women and surgeons in your own right. I know you have a microphone already, so take it away, Tinga.
Good morning, everyone. It's very humbling and very, I don't know, I'm overwhelmed by how supportive people are in this part of the country, and I'm very grateful. I'll speak for myself and say I'm very grateful for you giving money to organizations like this. I have known ReSurge since the beginning of my training. I'm one of the people who can say I've gone full circle with ReSurge, and then with Powers. Through ReSurge, I've then entered the Powers program. And through that, they've met me as a very young trainee in plastic surgery. They've seen me through my training, and I managed to actually graduate last year at the top of my class as a reconstructive surgeon in Zimbabwe. And it's through these initiatives that I am now able to stand in front of you right now and say that I lead a group of other surgeons who are trying to be plastic surgeons, other surgeons in training, through the training that I've gotten from the Powers program, to be able to lead as a leader. And also I'm hoping that these initiatives will be able to lead me to becoming the first hand surgery in Zimbabwe. So thank you very much for all the work you've been doing.
Where's my lesson?
Dr. Mitonga.
Good morning, and wow, thank you so much. That was very relatable, Julie. My name is Matala Semonga. I am a resident doctor in plastic surgery in Zambia. I've said that so many times this week, and it really it doesn't stop being unbelievable. We have about 18 million people in the country of Zambia. We've had one plastic surgeon for as long as I can remember. And I am now training to be one of those plastic surgeons. And I'm sure you can imagine we have quite a number of conditions in the country that need attention. As a first-generation doctor in my family, as a almost first-generation plastic surgeon in the country, as a woman doing surgery in a country that believes women are nurses and men are doctors, I can't overstate how helpful Powers has been for me. It's taught me leadership, being able to stand in front here and actually express myself. I want to say thank you to everyone who's contributed, and I really appreciate all of you for your contributions. Thank you.
I'm not crying, you're crying.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, guys. Talk about accomplished women. Incredible. Thank you, Tinga and Madalase, for sharing your perspectives and for being living proof of what we do every day. So before we conclude, everyone who knows me in this room knows what's coming next. I am here to sell you on what sold me to be here and to empower these women and to support a bigger mission. First of all, a big thank you to everyone who has been so generous already. We so appreciate your support. We couldn't do what we do and present what we present, as you just heard, without your help. For the newly anointed in the room, we have conveniently put these super awesome little white envelopes on your table. You'll see them here. And I hope you're inspired after what you heard from Julie and John and what you've heard from our Powers rock stars to join us in a mission that is bigger than what's here. but something that, according to John, probably started here. So perhaps I can tell you a little bit about why I give, and that will help you on your journey with us. I'll just try to be quick and succinct. First, we have a proven product, a solution that works. We have best-in-class reconstructive surgeons who teach a best-in-class training program. The model has a multiplier or ripple effect, thanks to Jim Chang's leadership in that, making it scalable anywhere, any place. As Julie says, it democratizes access to medical care where it's needed the most, so it levels the playing field. It's sustainable, it's a true impact model, and it changes the lives of so many patients globally, which ultimately, in turn, stimulates economies. That's why we do this. So it's innovative, it's entrepreneurial, and we are truly making a difference. I ask you to join me in supporting this really important work. Leslie, tell them a little bit how they can help.
So, I mean, you can help at all levels, and every dollar counts. $350 is the cost of one surgery by one of our outreach partners at no cost to the patient. And I want to say it's cheaper than a Hamilton ticket. Just putting it out there. $7,000 is a one-year hand fellowship in Nepal, so we can have more physicians like Dr. Nyoni. And $25,000 is a visiting educator trip, something that we do at Powers, where for 2 weeks, surgeons in their own countries are training with top 5 experts in reconstructive surgery so that we are teaching more to fish, so they can teach more to fish, and the ripple effect goes on and on. So don't be shy. And again, we thank you for your time here today and for your generosity, and of course for your generosity too, Julie and John, in sharing today. Thank you.
So we'll turn it back over to Jeff, who will conclude.
Please join me in thanking Christina and Leslie as chairs of our event this morning. And thanks again to SkinCeuticals for your leadership in co-creating this program with us, of which we are so, so proud. Thank you. This has been an amazing morning. To hear the stories of empowerment, the personal journeys, both of Julie as well as of John, has been such a privilege to accompany them in their comments. ReSurge continues to do this amazing work because of people like you, who believe in us, who support us, and join us in so many ways. We look forward to keeping you updated as we begin to travel again. We have several colleagues in this room who will be traveling to Zimbabwe next week. It's our first trip outside the United States in 20 months. So please, we will keep you updated as we begin to travel again, as we train more surgeons and surgical teams, and most importantly, as we continue to change lives together. Thank you. As you wrap up this morning, please pass this way to pick up your gift bag, provided generously also by SkinCeuticals. And I'm a firm believer. I'm actually 105 years old, so I'm a firm believer in the use of SkinCeuticals. If you would like to speak with any of our speakers, they'll be in this room for about another half hour. Please stick around and talk with us, and thank you. Have a good day.